Welcome back to Poirot Files. Today we're diving into an intriguing mystery, Hercule Poirot and the man who confessed to a crime that hadn't happened yet. A tale of deception, secrets, and Poirot's brilliant investigative mind. But before that, I want to say, you've shown me so much love and I truly appreciate it. Let us know where you're tuning in from. Grab your coffee and let's get started. Chapter 1. A confession without a crime. A biting November wind howled through the gas-lit streets of London, rattling the windows of Scotland Yard. The great city lay restless beneath a sky of thick, smothering clouds. Inside the police headquarters, the ticking of a clock punctuated the otherwise quiet night until the door burst open with a force that sent Inspector James Japp nearly spilling his tea. A man stumbled in, breathless, his face slick with perspiration. Despite the chill outside, his overcoat was askew, the buttons mismatched in his haste. He gripped the edge of Japp's desk with trembling hands. "I have done it," he gasped. "I have committed murder." Japp, who had seen all manner of criminals in his time, raised a skeptical brow. He set down his teacup with deliberate slowness, regarding the man with measured interest. The newcomer, though shaken, did not have the wild, furtive air of a man fresh from crime. His clothes, well-tailored but slightly dishevelled, spoke of money, or at least former affluence. His dark hair, streaked with grey, clung damply to his forehead. He might have been handsome in his youth, but something, perhaps fear or guilt, had hollowed his features. "And who might you be?" Japp asked, leaning back in his chair. "Captain Arthur Lytton." His voice cracked, then steadied. "Formerly of His Majesty's army." Japp exhaled, unimpressed. "And you say you've committed a murder, do you?" "Yes." Lytton swallowed hard. "I poisoned a man. I watched him die." Japp flicked a glance at the constable standing near the door. "And where exactly did you do this supposed murdering?" "At the Black Swan Inn." "In Marlow?" Japp frowned. "Marlow? When?" "Last night." "No, this morning, early." Lytton clenched his fists. I couldn't bear it any longer." "I had to come here. I had to confess." Japp sighed and stood, moving around his desk. He scrutinized Lytton with the sharp eyes of a man accustomed to spotting lies. "Now see here, Captain, I don't know what's put this idea into your head, but there's been no report of a murder in Marlow, no unexplained deaths, no missing persons." Lytton flinched as though struck. "That can't be." "Oh, but it is," Japp said mildly. Lytton's hands shook as he ran them over his face. No, you don't understand. I was there. I saw him. He was dying. I put arsenic in his sherry. He gasped, clawed at his throat, and then he was still." "His name?" "Charles Everleigh," Lytton said hoarsely. "I didn't know him well." "We travelled to Marlow together by train. He took room 4 at the inn. He swallowed again. "I had to do it." Japp was silent for a moment. Then he turned to the constable. "Get me the Marlow division on the line." The young officer nodded and disappeared. Japp turned back to Lytton, arms crossed. "You're telling me this Everleigh fellow is dead?" "Yes." "And no one's found him yet?" I don't know," Japp snorted. "Convenient, that." Minutes later, the constable returned, phone receiver still in hand. "Sir, Marlow police have checked the Black Swan Inn. No sign of a body, no guests unaccounted for." Japp stared at Lytton. "Well, Captain, your dead man appears to have walked away." Lytton paled further, his breath coming in ragged gasps. No, that's impossible." He buried his face in his hands. "Dear God, am I going mad?" Japp frowned. He had dealt with criminals of all sorts, hardened killers, reckless thieves, and the occasional madman. But this was different. Lytton's distress was too real, his horror too vivid. After a long pause, Japp reached for his telephone and dialed a number he knew by heart. It rang twice before a clipped, precise voice answered. "Poirot? Japp here. I have something rather peculiar for you." By the time Hercule Poirot arrived at Scotland Yard, the rain had begun to fall, fine and mist-like, dampening the world in a cold embrace. The small Belgian detective stepped inside, immaculate as always, his patent leather shoes gleaming despite the weather. His neatly waxed moustache twitched as he removed his gloves with practiced precision. "Ah, Japp," he said, his accent curling over the syllables. "You have for me a case of interest, n'est-ce pas?" Japp gestured toward Lytton, who sat hunched in a chair, hands clasped tightly in his lap. Poirot's sharp gaze flickered over him, noting the signs of distress, the faint sheen of sweat, the twitch of a muscle in his jaw. "This is Captain Arthur Lytton," Japp said. "He's just confessed to murder." "Ah," Poirot's eyes widened. "And yet, mon cher Japp, I suspect there is a most inconvenient problem." Japp sighed. "You could say that. The man he claims to have murdered is, well, he's not dead." Poirot's brows lifted. "Ah-huh?" He turned to Lytton. "Tell me, mon capitaine, when did you first meet this Charles Everleigh?" Lytton hesitated. 3 days ago, in London. We got to talking. He said he was travelling to Marlow, and He stopped, his throat working. Poirot's head tilted. "Yes?" Lytton inhaled sharply. "I knew I had to kill him." Japp scoffed. "You expect us to believe that?" Lytton turned, his haunted eyes locking onto Poirot's. "I can't explain it, but I knew. From the moment I met him, I felt it, like I had already done it, like I was meant to do it." A curious silence settled over the room. Poirot, unbothered, merely clasped his hands behind his back. "And what of the moment itself?" "I waited until we retired to our rooms. I took a small bottle of arsenic. I don't know where I got it. But it was in my pocket, as though it had always been there. I poured it into his sherry, and I watched him drink. He coughed, choked." Lytton shuddered. "And then he was dead." Poirot's fingers tapped against his forearm. "Fascinating," Japp exhaled, rubbing his temples. "Fascinating, is it? More like rubbish." Poirot did not respond. Instead, he studied Lytton with an intensity that made the man shift uncomfortably. "Tell me, Captain," Poirot murmured. "Did Charles Everleigh seem afraid?" Lytton blinked. "What? Before his death, did he seem to suspect something?" Lytton frowned, his mind sifting through the haze of memory. Yes, he did. Most interesting." Poirot straightened. "Japp, I believe it is time we visited Marlow, no?" Japp snorted. "Marlow? And what do you expect to find?" "We've already checked. There's no body." Poirot's lips curved slightly. "Perhaps not. But I do not search for the body, my friend. I search for something much more important." "And what's that?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The truth." As the rain pattered against the windows, a distant clock chimed the hour. The case of the murder that had not happened had begun. Chapter 2. A Body That Isn't There. A low mist clung to the countryside as the train rattled toward Marlow. Beyond the window, the Thames snaked lazily through the landscape, its surface broken only by the occasional ripple of a passing boat. Poirot sat opposite me, his small, immaculate figure relaxed but alert. His gloved hands rested lightly on the silver handle of his cane, and his green eyes, cat-like in their keenness, gleamed with amusement. "You seem troubled, Hastings," he said, breaking the companionable silence. I am, I admitted, shifting in my seat. It's this case, if you can even call it that. Japp seemed convinced that Captain Lytton is either mad or lying, and frankly, I'm inclined to agree. There's no body, no report of a murder, no missing persons, just the ramblings of a distressed man. Poirot tilted his head. And yet,
Mon ami, he did not seem mad, did he? Well, no, not mad, but certainly disturbed. Poirot tapped a finger against his chin. The good captain believes he committed a murder. He described the act in vivid detail. And yet the victim...
Charles Everly is not dead. Or so we are told. Is that not most interesting? I frowned. Interesting? Bizarre, more like. Ah, but what is bizarre is often the most logical, once one finds the correct perspective. Poirot steepled his fingers. Consider, Hastings, if a man confesses to a crime that has not happened, there are only a few possibilities. 1, he is mad and has imagined it all. 2, he is lying. Or 3, I leaned forward. 3, Poirot's eyes twinkled. 3, he is telling the truth, and we have simply not yet found the crime.
I sat back, shaking my head. You think Everly was murdered, but we just haven't discovered the body? Perhaps. Poirot's gaze drifted to the passing countryside. Or perhaps the murder has not yet happened. I gaped. You mean...
Lytton might have confessed to a crime before committing it? Precisely. Poirot gave a small smile. The question, mon ami, is why. Before I could reply, the train gave a small lurch, and the conductor passed by, announcing our arrival in Marlow. Poirot stood, smoothing his coat, and led the way onto the platform. The village was quiet, its streets damp from an earlier rain. The Black Swan Inn stood at the end of the lane, a charming but slightly weathered building, its sign creaking softly in the wind. The scent of damp earth and wood smoke filled the air. A stout woman in an apron bustled behind the bar as we stepped, inside polishing glasses with an air of practiced efficiency. She looked up, blinking at us over her spectacles. "Rooms, gentlemen?" Poirot stepped forward, offering a polite nod. "Non, madame, we are here concerning a matter of some curiosity. I am Hercule Poirot, and this is my friend Captain Hastings." Recognition flickered in her eyes, followed by guarded curiosity. "Poirot, you say? The detective?" Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed." She set down her cloth. "What's all this about, then?" "There was a guest here 2 nights ago, Charles Everly. She..." frowned. "Everly? No, sir. No one by that name stayed here." I glanced at Poirot. "That's impossible. Lytton was certain." "Certain or not, I keep a strict ledger," the woman said firmly. "No Everly." Poirot smiled faintly. "Perhaps not under that name, madame. Might I trouble you to look?" With a small sigh, she retrieved a thick guest book from behind the bar and flipped through the pages. "Here, 2 nights ago, only 4 guests checked in. A Mr. and Mrs. Harrow, an elderly gentleman named Thomas Redfern, and..." She hesitated. Poirot leaned in. "Yes?" She tapped the name. "Mr. Charles Estwick." Poirot and I exchanged glances. "A similar name, Hastings, but not the same." "Could it be an alias?" I suggested. "Perhaps." Poirot turned back to the innkeeper. "Tell me, madame, was this Mr. Estwick a man of middle years, dark hair streaked with grey?" She nodded slowly. "Yes. Come to think of it, he did match that description. Stayed in room 4. Poirot's expression did not change, but I could tell. He was intrigued. "And he has since departed?" "Yes, early yesterday morning." "Alone?" A pause. "Yes, as far as I know." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And did he seem unwell?" The woman's brow furrowed. No, though I must admit he was a bit uneasy, kept glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone. Poirot smiled. Aha! And did you clean the room after he left? Of course. Bed sheets, dusting, everything fresh. Then, madame, may we trouble you to see the room now? Though puzzled, she led us up a narrow staircase to a modestly furnished room. The scent of lavender and polish lingered in the air. Poirot moved about, his gaze flitting over every detail, the neatly tucked bed, the polished wooden desk, the empty fireplace. Then, quite suddenly, he stilled. Hastings, I stepped closer. Poirot pointed to the small table beside the bed. Observe. At first I saw nothing. Then I noticed it, a faint ring on the surface, as if from the base of a glass, a half-smudged mark beside it. Poirot lifted a brow. A glass, mon ami, and something spilled. I turned to the innkeeper. Did you find a glass here when you cleaned? She frowned. Yes, but I thought nothing of it. I simply rinsed it and returned it downstairs. Poirot nodded, satisfied. Madame, might we see this glass? She disappeared downstairs and returned moments later with a small tumbler. Poirot took it carefully, holding it to the light. He sniffed, then gave a quiet, "Ah!" "What is it?" I asked. Poirot's lips twitched. Hastings, I believe we have just found our first true clue. I stared at the glass. What do you mean? Poirot handed it to me. Smell. I did, catching only the faintest hint of something. Sharp, bitter. A memory stirred in my mind. Good heavens! Is that arsenic? Poirot confirmed. The innkeeper gasped. But no, that can't be right. No one's been poisoned here. Poirot merely smiled. Perhaps not, madame, but it seems someone intended to be. I felt a shiver down my spine. Then Lytton wasn't imagining it? Non, Poirot murmured, his eyes glittering. A crime is a puzzle, mon ami, but what if there is no crime? That is a puzzle even more delightful. A slow chill crept through the room. The rain had started again, tapping against the window pane. Somewhere, I felt certain, the truth waited, coiled, ready to strike. Chapter 3. The Vanishing Guest. The rain had settled into a gentle drizzle by the time we returned downstairs, the scent of damp wood and ale heavy in the air. Poirot, ever composed, placed the glass carefully on the bar and turned to the landlady. Madame, you say that this Mr. Estwick, who bears a most curious resemblance in name to Charles Everleigh, checked.
Out early yesterday morning?
She nodded, her expression troubled. Yes, sir. Packed his bag, paid his bill, and left. He seemed in a hurry, if I may say so. Poirot's moustache twitched slightly. And you saw him leave? Well, no, but I found his key on the desk when I came down that morning, and the room was empty. That means he left, doesn't it? Poirot lifted a finger. Not necessarily, madame. It means only that he is gone, but when, how, and under what circumstances, those are matters yet to be determined. I frowned. Surely he wouldn't have just vanished. Poirot tapped his temple. Vanished, no, but Hastings, have you not noticed the most intriguing detail in all of this? I shook my head. Poirot sighed, as if disappointed in my lack of imagination. Captain Lytton claimed to have poisoned this man. He described in great detail how the poison would take effect. And yet, this Everleigh, if indeed he and Estwick are one and the same, walked out of this inn alive. A chill crept up my spine. But then, I began hesitantly, doesn't that mean Lytton was lying? Poirot raised a brow. Perhaps, but lying why, and why choose a crime so specific, so dramatic, that it could be easily disproven? He turned back to the landlady. "Tell me, madame, this Mr. Estwick, how would you describe him?" She wiped her hands on her apron, considering. "A quiet sort. Mid-40s, I'd say. Dark hair with a bit of grey at the temples. Well-dressed, but not flashy. And, oh, I do recall something odd." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Yes, madame?" She hesitated, as if uncertain whether her memory could be trusted. "He never gave me a proper look at his face. He kept his hat low, his collar up. When he spoke, he turned slightly away. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Some folk are like that, aren't they?" Poirot smiled thinly. "Ah, but why was he like that?" She shook her head. "I couldn't say." Poirot turned to me. "Hastings, do you recall our good Captain Lytton's description of Charles Everley?" I frowned, thinking back. It was vague, come to think of it. He said the man was of average height, dark-haired, but not much else. He seemed to remember the poisoning better than the victim himself. Poirot spread his hands. "Et voilà. And does that not strike you as most strange? Our supposed murderer, who claimed to watch his victim die, cannot even describe him in any detail." I was beginning to see Poirot's point, though it troubled me. "But then, what are you suggesting?" Poirot turned back to the landlady. "Did Mr. Estwick speak much?" She shook her head. "No, not at all. Ordered supper the first night, kept to his room mostly. Seemed nervous." "Nervous, madam?" "Yes, like he was expecting something. Or someone." Poirot turned away, tapping his chin. "Hastings, my friend," he murmured, "I begin to suspect that we are dealing with something most unusual. Either Captain Lytton is the victim of an elaborate trick, or he is an unwitting player in a greater drama."
I stared. "You mean this Everley fellow might not be real?" Poirot gave a tiny nod. "A name on a guest ledger, a man who keeps his face hidden, a victim no one can properly describe. Does it not sound, mon ami, as if we are chasing a phantom?"
Shiver ran through me. Then why would Lytton believe he had killed him? Poirot turned, his face grave. "That, Hastings, is the question we must answer." Just then, the door swung open with a gust of damp wind, and a uniformed officer stepped inside, glancing around before spotting us. He approached, clearing his throat. "Mr. Poirot?" Poirot inclined his head. "Yes, my friend." "A telegram for you, sir." Poirot took the envelope and, with a flick of his fingers, sliced it open. His eyes scanned the message, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something close to surprise in his expression. "What is it?"
I asked, my impatience mounting. He handed me the paper. "From Inspector Japp update on Charles Everley. A man matching Everley's description was found this morning in a London boarding house. Dead. Poisoned." The words seemed to jump off the page.
I looked up at Poirot in shock. "But that's impossible," I stammered. "If Everley was here, alive and well, only yesterday morning—" Poirot's voice was quiet, but firm. "Then, mon ami, we must ask ourselves, who was the man that left this inn?" A tense silence fell between us. Outside, the rain fell harder, drumming against the windows. The mystery had just deepened, and I had the uneasy feeling that the real game had only just begun. Chapter 4. The first clue. The morning air inside the Black Swan Inn carried the scent of damp wood and old tobacco, a sharp contrast to the crisp countryside beyond its doors. Poirot held the gold cufflink between his fingers, turning it over with the meticulous scrutiny of a jeweller examining a rare diamond. "Curious, Hastings," he murmured. "A modest traveller with a most immodest possession. Does it not intrigue you?" I studied the small object. The letter R was engraved in an elegant, old-fashioned script, the kind that suggested family wealth and tradition. It certainly doesn't fit the image of Everly as we know him, I admitted. Precisely, mon ami. Either Everly was a man of secrets, or this belongs to another. Poirot turned to the landlady. Madame, you are certain that room 4 has not been occupied for a week before this Everly arrived? The landlady pursed her lips, then gave a small nod. Aye, that's right. We've been quiet lately, as I said before. Poirot studied her. And yet this cufflink, it is not something that walks in by itself, n'est-ce pas? She looked slightly uneasy, but held her ground. Maybe he dropped it himself? Poirot hummed under his breath, pocketing the cufflink. Perhaps. And yet I do not think so. Non, non. There is something about this that speaks of a different story entirely. I turned to the chambermaid, Annie, who still hovered nervously by the door. Tell me, did Mr. Everly seem unusual to you? She hesitated. Well, now that you mention it, sir, he was a bit odd. Kept to himself, barely spoke to anyone. A man of solitude, Poirot prompted. Not quite, sir. More like nervous, like he was afraid of something. Every time he heard a noise in the hall, he'd glance up sharp-like, as if expecting someone. Poirot's moustache twitched. Very interesting. And did he have any visitors? She shook her head. Not that I saw, sir. Poirot clasped his hands together. So we have a man who fears he is being followed, a man who travels modestly, but may have possessions of wealth, a man who, according to Captain Lytton, was murdered, yet is very much alive when he departs from this very inn. I sighed. You make it sound even more perplexing than it already is. Ah, Hastings, it is the complexity that makes it exquisite. But now we must determine who this Charles Everly truly was. Where do we begin? Why with the past, mon ami? Because a man who fears being followed has something to fear from his own history. Poirot turned on his heel, signalling our next course
of action. The investigation was only beginning, but already the puzzle was taking shape.
Chapter 5. Shadows from the Past. The sun hung low in the sky as Poirot and I returned to Scotland Yard, where Captain Arthur Lytton was waiting in a small, dimly lit interrogation room. His fingers tapped restlessly against the wooden table, his eyes shifting between the door and the clock on the wall. Poirot entered with a quiet authority, his presence immediately altering the atmosphere in the room. He took a seat opposite Lytton, folding his hands neatly before him. I remained standing, watching, as Poirot studied the man with his sharp, unwavering gaze. Captain Lytton, Poirot began, his voice calm but probing, I must ask you to recount, once more, the precise details of your acquaintance with Charles Everly. Lytton sighed, running a hand through his dishevelled hair. I've told you everything I know. I met Everly in London at a small club near Piccadilly. We got to talking. Casual. Conversation, you understand? He seemed a decent enough fellow, though a bit on edge. He mentioned needing to leave London for a few days, and I was looking to get away myself. We decided to travel together to Marlow. Poirot inclined his head slightly. And how did you travel, mon capitaine? By train, of course. Caught the
afternoon service from Paddington. Poirot's fingers drummed lightly against the table. Curious, very curious. Lytton frowned.
What's curious about it? Poirot leaned forward ever so slightly. Because, mon ami, the railway records show no such man as Charles Everly purchasing a ticket. Not from Paddington, nor from any other station in London. Lytton's face paled. That can't be right. He was with me. Ah, but was he? Poirot murmured, his voice dangerously soft. Or did he only exist in your mind, planted there by someone with a most clever design? Lytton swallowed hard, his hands clenching into fists. You think I imagined?
Him? Poirot shook his head. No, not imagined, manipulated. There is a difference. Lytton's voice wavered.
But I spoke to him, I sat beside him on the train, I watched him drink from his own flask. And yet, Poirot said smoothly, there is no evidence of his presence, apart from your word. Lytton let out a shaky breath. Then what are you saying, Poirot? Straightened, his gaze unrelenting. I am saying that you, mon capitaine, are either the victim of a deception or its architect. Lytton shot to his feet. That's absurd. Poirot merely lifted a hand. Calm yourself, monsieur. I seek only the truth, and to find it, we must examine the past, n'est-ce pas? A muscle in Lytton's jaw tightened. What do you want to know? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Let us begin with you, Captain. Tell me, what troubles you? Lytton hesitated, then exhaled. I've had financial difficulties, if that's what you mean. Poirot gave a small nod. Indeed. And these difficulties, they are recent, no? Lytton glanced away. The war took its toll on men like me. My commission ended, and I struggled to find work. I made a few bad investments, lost more than I could afford. Poirot steepled his fingers. And so you were desperate. Lytton's mouth set into a grim line. If you're suggesting I concocted this entire story to cover up some scheme, you're
mistaken. I was in Marlowe. Everly was real. Poirot considered him for a long moment, then leaned back.
Then we must find him, n'est-ce pas? Lytton's eyes flickered with unease. If he's still alive, yes. Poirot tapped his chin thoughtfully. A man who is murdered, but is not dead. A man who exists, but is not real. His voice dropped to a whisper. Très intéressant. The puzzle was far from solved, but I could see in Poirot's eyes that the little grey cells were already at work. Chapter 6. A Sudden Death. The news arrived the following morning, delivered by an urgent telephone call from Inspector Japp. Poirot and I had barely finished breakfast when the ringing of the telephone interrupted the peaceful quiet of our lodgings. Poirot, who had been carefully buttering his toast with meticulous precision, set down his knife and rose to answer. Allô? His voice was calm, measured. But within moments his expression shifted ever so slightly, his eyes narrowing. Mon Dieu, he breathed. You are certain? A brief pause. Yes, of course. We shall come at once. As he replaced the receiver, I could see the flicker of excitement beneath his composed exterior. Hastings, mon ami, he said, turning to me with a glint in his eye. The impossible has happened. Charles Everly is dead. I stared at him. What? Poirot nodded. Strangled in his London apartment. But, voilà, here is the most intriguing detail. His body was found just as our unfortunate Captain Lytton described in his confession. He paused dramatically. Glass of sherry?
Arsenic traces in his system.
I could only gape at him. But that's absurd. When Lytton confessed, Everly was very much alive. We have proof that he left the Black Swan Inn and travelled to London. Poirot smiled, that enigmatic little smile of his that always signified he was steps ahead of everyone else. Justament, we must go to Scotland Yard, Hastings. The mystery deepens. Within the hour, we were seated in Inspector Japp's office, the detective puffing on his pipe with a deep furrow in his brow. I don't like it, Poirot, Japp grumbled.
I don't like it one bit. The whole thing stinks. Poirot gave a slight bow of his head. Permit me to understand, mon cher Japp. The body of Charles Everly was discovered this morning, yes? Japp nodded. Landlady found him, said she...
knocked several times before using her spare key, found him slumped in his chair, a glass of sherry at his elbow.
Autopsy confirms traces of arsenic in his system, he sighed. Thing is, that ain't what killed him. I stiffened. It wasn't? Jap shook his head. No, strangled he was. Marks on the throat. But the arsenic? That's what's...
Got me. It was the exact dose Lytton described in his confession. He leaned forward. Now tell me, Poirot, how the devil did that man know how Everly would die before it happened? Poirot steepled his fingers and gave a small shrug. A most intriguing question, mon ami. But tell me, what do we know of Charles Everly? Who was he? Jap huffed. Not much, truth be told. Lived alone, didn't have many visitors. According to his landlady, he travelled frequently. Claimed to be a businessman, but we can't find any real records of his employment. Might have had money, though. Not enough to be rich, but comfortable. And then there's this... Jap reached into a folder and pulled out a small evidence bag. Inside was a single gold cufflink, identical to the one we had found at the inn. The second cufflink, I murmured. Engraved with an R, just like the other, Jap confirmed. Now here's the funny thing. Everly had no initials.
R in his name. No middle name either. Poirot's lips pressed together.
Très intéressant, he murmured. I frowned. Then they must belong to someone else. Poirot gave me an approving nod. Très bien, mon ami. The question is, who? Jap exhaled sharply. We'll be looking into his known associates. See if we can trace anyone with connections to him. He hesitated. And what about Lytton? Poirot tilted his head. Indeed, Captain Lytton's position becomes most perplexing.
If he did not kill Everly, how did he describe the crime before it occurred? That's what I want to know, Jap said grimly. We're keeping him under watch, but he's swearing up and down that he had nothing to do with this. I'm
half inclined to believe him. He's rattled, Poirot. Poirot smiled slightly. Then, mon cher, I believe it is time we speak to him once more. By the time we arrived at Scotland Yard's holding cells, Captain Lytton looked even worse than he had the day before. His complexion was pallid, his eyes haunted. He sat on the edge of the cot, hands gripping his knees as though they were the only things keeping him upright. When he saw us enter, he stood abruptly. You have to believe me, he said, his voice hoarse. I had nothing to do with it. Poirot gave him a measured look. And yet, Captain, you described the scene.
Of Everly's death in perfect detail before it happened.
Lytton shook his head violently. I don't understand it. I told you I had a dream or a vision. I don't know. I saw it, Poirot, but I swear to you I didn't kill him. Poirot studied him in silence for a long moment. Tell me, Captain, did Everly ever mention a name to you? A friend, perhaps? Or an associate? Lytton hesitated. No, I don't think so. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Think carefully, mon capitaine. Even a passing remark. Lytton frowned. His forehead creased in concentration. Then suddenly his expression changed. Wait, there was something. At the inn, the night before we arrived, Everly had a letter. He read it, then burned it in the fireplace, but I remember the name on the envelope. Poirot leaned forward ever so slightly. Yes? Reginald. A slow smile spread across Poirot's face. Ah, enfin, the R. Hastings, my friend.
Do you not see? I blinked. See what exactly? Poirot clasped his hands together.
We have been searching for a man named Charles Everly, mais non? But what if Charles Everly was merely an assumed name? He turned back to Lytton. Describe him to me once more. Lytton furrowed his brow. Tall, dark-haired, well-dressed.
About 40 or so, Poirot nodded. And now we must ask ourselves, who is Reginald? Jap exhaled sharply. I'll get my men on it, Poirot smiled. Très bien. But I think we are getting close, n'est-ce pas?
Despite my lingering confusion, I recognized that familiar gleam in Poirot's eyes. The great detective had seen a thread where the rest of us had seen only knots. And though the mystery had only deepened, one thing was certain. This case was far from over. Chapter 7. The Return of the Cufflink. The journey to Mayfair was conducted in a silence broken only by the steady clatter of carriage wheels on cobbled streets. Poirot sat beside me, arms neatly folded, eyes half-lidded in thought. He had been unusually quiet since our departure from Scotland Yard, and I knew better than to disturb him when he was occupied with his little grey cells. It was only when we arrived at the grand townhouse of Sir Reginald Ashworth that Poirot stirred. The building loomed before us, a testament to old money and impeccable breeding. The butler, an elderly man with an air of quiet authority, took our coats and led us into an ornate drawing-room where Sir Reginald himself awaited us. He was a tall, distinguished gentleman with silvered temples and a carefully tailored suit. His posture was that of a man accustomed to command, but there was something else, something just beneath the surface. A flicker of tension in the way his fingers drummed against the armrest of his chair, a tightness in his jaw as he regarded Poirot with polite but unmistakable wariness. "Monsieur Poirot," he greeted, his voice clipped. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Poirot inclined his head slightly. "You are too kind, Sir Reginald. My friend Captain Hastings and I have but a small matter on which we seek your esteemed insight." Sir Reginald made a non-committal sound. "I can't imagine what possible business I would have with a detective." "Ah, but that is the mystery, n'est-ce pas?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "You see, we have come across an object of some curiosity, a rather distinguished gold cufflink engraved with an R." Sir Reginald's fingers stilled. Poirot continued, feigning obliviousness to the sudden stiffness in the older man's posture. "A London jeweller has confirmed that the design is quite unique, belonging, in fact, to a collection commissioned by yourself some years ago." He tilted his head. "Would that be correct?" There was the smallest hesitation, so small one might have missed it. Then Sir Reginald gave a curt nod. "Yes, a custom set, but I failed to see—" "We found one such cufflink in the room, V."
"A recently murdered man," Poirot interrupted smoothly, "and the second at the scene of his death." A silence settled over the room. The only sound was the faint ticking of a grand clock against the wall. Sir Reginald's lips pressed into
a thin line. "I'm afraid I cannot help you, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot raised a brow. "No?" The man shifted slightly. "I have no idea how such an item came into the possession of a murdered man." Poirot smiled, but there was a sharpness to it. "And yet, monsieur, we have not yet given you his name." There it was. A fraction of a second. The barest tightening of the throat. The flicker of something in his gaze before he caught himself. I had seen this play out many times before. Poirot, in his infuriatingly patient manner, had laid a trap. And Sir Reginald had stepped neatly into it. Poirot's voice was soft. "But of course you already knew it." Sir Reginald exhaled through his nose. "This is ridiculous," he said brusquely. "I have no connection to any such man." Poirot sighed, shaking his head in exaggerated disappointment. "Ah, but you see, monsieur, the guilty man protests too much." He turned slightly toward me. "Do you not agree, Hastings?" I cleared my throat. "Well, it does seem rather strange that the cufflink should turn up in such a place." Sir Reginald's eyes darted between us. "What exactly are you
implying?" Poirot did not answer at once. Instead, he leaned forward ever so slightly, his gaze fixed upon the man opposite him. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost conversational. "Tell me, monsieur, what did Charles Everley have on you?" For a moment, Sir Reginald said nothing.
His knuckles whitened as his grip tightened around the armrest. And then, "This conversation is over." His voice was controlled, but there was an unmistakable tremor beneath it. "I will not be harassed in my own home." Poirot rose gracefully. "Mais bien sûr, we would not dream of imposing." He adjusted his cuffs. "But I would ask one last thing, monsieur. How many of your cufflinks are missing?" Sir Reginald's mouth opened, then closed again. Poirot inclined his head. "You? Si, mon cher, I suspect the answer is 2. The butler showed us out shortly after." As we stepped onto the street, I turned to Poirot. "Well, he was certainly rattled," Poirot nodded. "Naturellement. He has much to hide," I frowned. "But what? And what could Everley have had on him?" Poirot did not answer at once. "It is a question of identity, mon ami," he mused. "Everley is not who he claimed to be."
"And Sir Reginald? He knows far more than he will admit." I frowned. "Do you think Everley was blackmailing him?" Poirot tapped a finger against his lips. "Perhaps. Or perhaps their connection is even more complex." He turned, beginning
to walk. "Come, Hastings. We have much to do." As we made our way down the street, I couldn't help but shake the feeling that we had just scratched the surface of something far greater, and whatever lay beneath, it was waiting to be uncovered. Chapter 8. A Hidden Connection. The revelation that Charles Everley had, in fact, been Charles Rivington, a disgraced financier with a murky past, added a new layer of intrigue to the case. As Hastings and I made our way back to Whitehaven Mansions, my mind turned over the implications of this discovery. A man who had reinvented himself, slipping through the cracks of society, only to meet his end in the precise manner foreseen by another. Très curieux. Hastings, ever eager to speculate, was deep in thought as well. So, Poirot, Rivington was hiding in plain sight under the name Everley. It's a wonder no one recognized him. Poirot steepled his fingers. "Not a wonder at all, my friend. A man who wishes to disappear can do so quite easily if he has the means and intelligence. And Rivington, for all his moral failings, was
not a fool." "But why resurface now?" Hastings mused. "And more importantly, why was he murdered?" "Ah," Poirot tapped his temple.
"That, Hastings, is the heart of the matter. Who benefits from his death?" At that moment, a knock at the door interrupted our discussion. It was Inspector Japp, his expression one of barely contained triumph. "Well, well, Poirot, looks like we've got our man." Poirot gestured for him to sit. "Mon cher, you must not keep us in suspense." Japp pulled out his notebook. "We did some digging. This Rivington fellow, he ruined plenty of lives in that fraud scandal years back. Most of his old associates."
"Lost everything, but there was one name that stood out, Sir Reginald Ashworth."
Hastings sat up straighter. "So it was blackmail?" Japp smirked. "Seems likely. Ashworth had the motive. Rivington might have been pressing him for money. And guess what? We found something else." He flipped a page. Ashworth's manservant, a bloke named Lionel Moore, was spotted near Rivington's apartment the night of the murder. Poirot remained still, but I could see the flicker of thought behind his eyes. "And what was he doing there?" "That's what we're looking into," Japp admitted. "But here's the kicker. Moore disappeared the day after the murder. No sign of him anywhere." Poirot nodded slowly. "Interesting." Japp stood. "We'll find him, don't you worry. But between you and me, Poirot, I wouldn't be surprised if Ashworth paid him to get rid of Rivington. And if that's the case, he won't stay missing for long. Guilt has a funny way of bringing men
out of hiding."
After Japp left, Hastings leaned forward. What do you make of it, Poirot? Poirot was silent for a long moment. Hastings, tell me, what does a man do when he is desperate? I frowned. Well, I suppose he takes risks. Perhaps he makes mistakes. Poirot nodded. Exactly. If Sir Reginald was being blackmailed, he would be desperate indeed. But would he resort to murder? You think he's innocent? Poirot tapped his fingers against his chin. I think it is too convenient. A cufflink found in the victim's room, a missing servant easily framed, and a blackmail motive laid out before us like a neat little package. Hastings frowned. But if not Ashworth, then who? Poirot stood suddenly. We must speak to Lytton again. We made our way to Scotland Yard, where Lytton remained under observation. He sat in a small interrogation room, his face haggard. Gone was the frantic energy of his first confession. He seemed subdued, almost resigned. Poirot took a seat across from him. Captain Lytton, I would like to ask you once more, how did you know how Rivington would die? Lytton exhaled, running a hand through his dishevelled hair. I told you, Poirot, I saw it. I don't know how, but I did. Poirot leaned in slightly. Did you ever meet Charles Rivington? Lytton hesitated. No, not exactly. I mean, I knew of him. Poirot's gaze sharpened. But you recognized him. A muscle twitched in Lytton's jaw. Yes, he admitted. But I didn't know him personally. Hastings frowned. Then how did you come to be involved in
all this? Lytton hesitated again. Poirot's voice softened. Mon ami, if you are innocent, you must tell us everything. Finally, Lytton exhaled. All right.
I was at the Black Swan Inn that night. I saw Rivington. He looked uneasy, kept checking the door. I thought nothing of it at first. But then, as I went up to my room, I overheard something. What did you hear? A man's
voice. He was speaking to Rivington, threatening him. Lytton swallowed. I couldn't hear everything, but he said something about paying the price at last. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Did you see the man? Lytton shook his head.
No, I left shortly after, but later that night I had this dream, Poirot.
I saw Rivington poisoned in that very room. The glass of sherry, the convulsions. I woke up in a panic, convinced it had happened. He rubbed his temples. But when I went back to the inn, there was no body, no crime. I thought I was losing.
My mind? Hastings and I exchanged glances. Poirot, however, looked thoughtful. Tell me, mon cher, have you ever had such premonitions before? Lytton hesitated. No, Poirot nodded. Très bien. He rose. I thank you, Captain Lytton. You have given me much to consider. As we left Scotland Yard, Hastings turned to Poirot. Well, what do you think? Poirot's eyes twinkled. It is as I suspected, Hastings. Lytton was not having a vision. He was remembering. I frowned. Remembering? Poirot nodded. He heard a murder being planned, but not the one that took place in London. Hastings's eyes widened. You mean? Poirot smiled. Yes.
Hastings, I believe we have been looking at this the wrong way. Rivington's murder was not an act of blackmail gone wrong. It was an execution. The street lamp above us flickered, casting long shadows as we stepped out into the night. And
I knew without a doubt that the true mystery had only just begun. Chapter 9. The Second Murder. The news of Sir Reginald Ashworth's death reached us early the next morning. A telegram from Japp, terse and to the point, informed us that the industrialist had been found dead in his study, an apparent suicide, By the time Hastings and I arrived at Ashworth's grand residence in Kensington, Scotland Yard was already well into their investigation. Japp stood near the heavy mahogany desk, arms folded, his expression smug. "Well, Poirot, looks like we've reached the end of this little puzzle. Sir Reginald Ashworth found dead in his study, a revolver in his hand and a suicide note neatly placed beside him." He held up the note, which read simply, "I could not escape my guilt." Hastings exhaled. "Well, there you have it, Poirot. He must have killed Rivington, Everley, I mean, and the weight of it was too much for him." Poirot, however, remained unimpressed. His eyes swept the room, taking in every detail, the heavy drapes drawn shut, the lingering scent of cigar smoke in the air. The revolver resting in Ashworth's right hand, though slightly askew. Poirot moved with precise steps, adjusting the angle of his gaze as though each perspective might reveal something different.
"Tell me, Japp," Poirot said at last. "Who discovered the body?"
"His valet," Japp replied. "A man named Thompson. Says he knocked several times, but when he got no answer, he entered and found Ashworth slumped over the desk." "And the door was locked?" Japp nodded. "From the inside." Poirot sighed. "Ah, a locked room, a suicide note, a revolver conveniently placed. It is too perfect, mon cher."
"A crime neatly wrapped up, but the ribbon is tied too tightly. It does not fit." Japp frowned. "What do you mean, doesn't fit?" "The man had motive. Rivington was blackmailing him. The pressure got too much, and he decided to end it." Poirot
made a small noise of disapproval. "Tell me, Japp, how many men who truly intend to take their own lives sit down at their desk, neatly arrange a note, and then shoot themselves at such an awkward angle?" Japp shifted his weight. "You're saying he didn't kill himself?" Poirot gave a sharp nod. "Exactement." He pointed to Ashworth's right hand. "A revolver, yes, but look at the way it rests. Slightly turned, unnatural. A man who fires upon himself would drop the weapon more naturally. No?" Japp pursed his lips. "Could have been nerves, his grip loosening strangely in death." Poirot ignored him, continuing his examination. He ran a careful finger along the edge of the desk. Then he leaned in closer, sniffing the air. Hastings, perplexed, whispered, "What are you doing, Poirot?" Poirot turned to him with a knowing smile. "There is a faint trace of perfume in the air, something delicate."
"Not cigar smoke, not the scent of whiskey that lingers on Sir Reginald's lips. No, something floral." He straightened, eyes glinting. "A woman was here, Hastings," Japp groaned. "Poirot, this is a wealthy man. We're in his private
"Study. If he had female guests, that's hardly a crime." Poirot wagged a finger. "No, no, mon ami. This is no lingering scent from days past. This perfume was recent. Whoever was here, she was here just before his death." Hastings hesitated. "But if a woman was here, how does that prove murder?" Poirot turned to the valet, Thompson, who stood nervously by the doorway. "Monsieur, tell me, did Sir Reginald have visitors last night?" The man hesitated. "No, sir. At least, not that I saw. He dined alone, then retired to his study." Poirot nodded. "And he was in good spirits?" "Well, no, sir," the valet admitted. He was restless, kept pacing. Poirot folded his arms. "And tell me, did you notice anything unusual when you found the body?" Thompson's brow furrowed. "Now that you mention it, the window was open, though I'd swear it had been closed earlier. And there was a single glass on the desk, his whiskey glass, but it smelled odd. Bitter, almost." Poirot's face lit up. "Parfait. Hastings, do you recall how Rivington was killed?" Hastings frowned. "Yes, arsenic in his sherry." Poirot turned to Japp triumphantly. "And now, Sir Reginald, with a glass that smells bitter. Mon cher, we are not dealing with a suicide at all, but a second murder. Japp still looked skeptical.
All right, say he was murdered. How do you explain the suicide note? Poirot picked it up delicately, turning it over in his fingers.
A man on the verge of death, racked with guilt, writes only 5 words, no explanation, no farewell. And yet, observe, he gestured to the writing. This was written hastily, but the strokes are too controlled. I do not believe this. Note was written by a man on the edge of despair. No, this was written to appear as a suicide. Japp sighed. So what are you saying? Someone poisoned him, then staged the whole thing? Poirot smiled. It is most ingenious, is it not? He tapped the note. Someone wanted us to believe that Sir Reginald killed Rivington and, overcome with remorse, took his own life. But in reality, both men were murdered. Hastings frowned. But why?
If not blackmail, then what's the real motive? Poirot tilted his head. That, my dear Hastings, is the true mystery. Rivington, a man of deception trying to escape his past. Ashworth, seemingly at the heart of the crime, but now silenced.
Forever. And a woman's perfume lingering in the air. His eyes gleamed. We are looking at something much larger than blackmail, my friends. There is another player in this game, one who eliminates those who know too much. Japp rubbed his temples. So what do you suggest? Poirot's voice was quiet but firm. We find the woman. The study fell into a hush, the weight of his words settling over us like a thick fog. Somewhere in the city, the true culprit was watching, waiting. But for how much longer? Chapter 10. Poirot's little grey cells at work, back at the black. Swan Inn. The air was thick with the scent of polished wood and the faint remnants of last night's fire. The innkeeper greeted us with wary politeness, clearly unsettled by Poirot's return. Hastings and I followed as he made his way toward room 4, where this peculiar case had begun. He paused just inside the doorway, surveying the room with sharp eyes. The sherry glass remained on the nightstand, preserved under a bell jar. Poirot approached it with great delicacy, his fingers tracing the edge of the bell jar before he carefully lifted it and examined the glass beneath. "There is something most interesting here, Hastings," he murmured. Hastings leaned in. "What is it, Poirot?"
It looks exactly the same as before. Justament! And yet that is precisely what is so intriguing. He turned to Japp, who had accompanied us from London, though he had done so under protest. Tell me, mon cher Japp, when a man lifts a glass to his lips, what does he leave behind?
Japp frowned. What kind of question is that? Fingerprints, obviously. Poirot nodded. Précisément. But look here, this glass from which Lytton supposedly drank has none. Hastings stiffened. But that's impossible, Poirot. He must have touched it. Unless, Poirot said softly. He never did. A hush fell over the room. Japp scratched his head. Hold on. Lytton thought he poisoned Everly.
He was certain of it. He told us as much. So are you saying that he was made to believe he had done so? Mais oui. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Lytton was set up. He did not poison Everly at all, but someone wished him to think that he had.
Hastings hesitated. But why? Why would anyone go to such lengths? Poirot turned away from the glass, folding his arms. Consider, my friends, if you wish to kill a man and divert suspicion, what better way than to ensure a false confession? Before the crime is even committed. Japp let out a low whistle. Blimey, that's clever, all right. Hastings's brow furrowed. But that means someone knew Everly, Rivington rather, was going to be murdered before it happened. They planned everything in advance. Poirot inclined his head. Exactly, mon ami. A great deal of effort has gone into this deception. The arsenic, the false identity, the staged confession, all these things suggest a mind that is careful, calculating. He gestured toward the room. Someone wished for Lytton to be the perfect scapegoat. Japp huffed. All right. Say you're right, Poirot. That still doesn't tell us who is behind all this. We know Rivington had enemies. He was a swindler, after all, and Ashworth was caught up in his blackmail scheme. But Ashworth's dead now, too. Who else would want him gone? Poirot's fingers twitched, as they often did when his mind was working furiously. That, mon cher Japp, is the question we must answer. But let us not move too quickly. Instead, let us look back to the beginning. He gestured for Hastings and me to sit, while he himself took a chair by the fireplace. Steepling his fingers, let us recall what we know. Lytton and Everly arrived here together. Everly stayed in this very room, room 4. Yet in the morning he was gone, checked out as though nothing had happened. Lytton, convinced he had poisoned him, went straight to the police. Hastings nodded. And yet Everly, Rivington, was alive at that point. We now know he wasn't murdered until later in London. Precisely. So we must ask ourselves, what occurred here that led Lytton to believe he had committed a crime? Japp frowned. He must have been tricked. Poirot nodded approvingly. Bien joué, but tricked how? Think, mes amis. He drank sherry with Everly that evening. He saw the man before him alive. He believed he had placed poison in the glass. And then? He went to bed, Hastings said. When he woke, Everly was gone. Oui, and that is the crux of it, my friends. Everly left, or was taken, from this room. Lytton never saw a dead body. He simply assumed, based on what he believed he had done, that the man was dead. Poirot's voice dropped slightly. But why would Everly leave? If he
had truly been poisoned, he would have collapsed here.
But instead he left this place as if nothing was wrong. Japp's expression darkened. Which means he wasn't poisoned at all. Exactly, mon cher. Someone removed him from the scene, ensuring that no body was found. They wanted the crime to seem unfinished, to plant doubt in Lytton's mind. They wanted him to question his own memory, and most of all they wanted to ensure that by the time the real murder took place, the police would already have their convenient suspect. Hastings shook his head. But how could they have known Everly Rivington would be killed in London later? What if he had simply disappeared? Poirot's voice was calm but certain. Because, my dear Hastings, Everly's death was always part of the plan. The moment he stepped into this inn, his fate was sealed. Japp exhaled sharply. So what? We've got is a premeditated murder, where the killer set everything up beforehand, right down to the scapegoat. Justement! Poirot clapped his hands together. And the key to it all, mes amis, is the who. Who stood to gain from Rivington's death? Who had the cunning to orchestrate such an elaborate deception? And, his voice lowered, who was the woman whose perfume lingered in Sir Reginald's study? Hastings straightened. You think she's at the centre of it? Poirot's eyes gleamed. She is the thread that ties everything together, mon ami. A woman was here at the Black Swan Inn, I am certain of it, and another, or perhaps the same, was present at Ashworth's study. She is no mere bystander. No, she is the key. Japp glanced around the room. So what's next? Poirot stood, adjusting his cuffs. Now, mes amis, we search for the woman, and I have a very good idea where we shall begin. Chapter 11. The Cleverest Deception. The journey back to London was a quiet one. Hastings sat beside me in the train carriage, fidgeting with his gloves, while Japp scowled at the passing countryside, deep in thought. As for Poirot, he remained perfectly still, his fingertips pressed together, his eyes half closed. I knew better than to mistake this for idleness. His mind was at work, assembling the pieces of this most perplexing puzzle. At last, Hastings could contain himself no longer. "Poirot, I must say this is the most devilish trick I've ever heard of. Hypnosis of all things. Are you quite certain?" Poirot opened his eyes and regarded Hastings with something between amusement and exasperation. "Mon ami, it is the only explanation that fits. Consider, Lytton believes he poisoned Everly. He is utterly convinced. And yet we know that Everly left the Black Swan Inn alive. Therefore, Lytton's memory of the event must be false. And if a man holds a memory that is not his own, how can that be?" Japp gave a short laugh. "Oh, come now, Poirot. Hypnosis? It's the stuff of music halls and charlatans." Poirot lifted a delicate finger. "Non, mon cher Japp, it is a tool, and a most effective one in the hands of a skilled operator. You must not think of it as something mystical. It is, at its core, a means of suggestion, a trick of the mind. Tell me, have you never seen a man wake from a dream, convinced for a moment that it was real?" Japp shifted uncomfortably. "Well, perhaps. But to make a man confess to a crime he never committed? Not just confess, Japp. Believe. That is the mark of true cleverness. Whoever orchestrated this knew precisely how to manipulate Lytton. The question, my friends, is why?" Hastings frowned. "To frame him, surely?" Poirot shook his head. "Ah, Hastings, you think only of the first layer of the deception. But no, the true motive is deeper. If they merely wished to frame Lytton, why not plant evidence? Why not ensure Everly's body was discovered at the Black Swan Inn? Instead, they allowed Everly to walk free, only to kill him later in London.
Why? A heavy silence fell over us. Outside, the grey sky of London loomed ahead as we neared our destination. Japp let out a slow breath. "So what you're saying is, the whole thing was a diversion?"
Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Exactly, mon cher. A diversion of the most exquisite kind. By ensuring Lytton confessed before the crime even took place, the true killer achieved two things. First, they confused the timeline, making it difficult to determine when Everly actually died. And second, most importantly, they created the perfect alibi for themselves." Hastings blinked. "How do you mean?" Poirot spread his hands. "Think, mon ami. The police were occupied with Lytton's confession. By the time we realized Everly had been murdered, our minds were already predisposed to suspect Lytton. Meanwhile, the real killer was elsewhere, far from suspicion." Japp sat up straighter. "Which means they needed Lytton not just to think he'd done it, but to make sure the police wasted time on him, giving them a chance to do the real deed." Poirot nodded. "Precisely. It is the cleverest deception, n'est-ce pas? A murder that has already been solved before it even happens." We arrived at Paddington Station, where a sharp wind greeted us. Poirot wasted no time in leading us to a waiting cab, issuing instructions to the driver with his usual precision. I did not realize where we were headed until the familiar streets of Mayfair came into view. "Sir Reginald Ashworth's residence?" I asked. Poirot nodded. "Indeed, Hastings, there is something still to be found there. I am certain of it." We arrived at the grand Ashworth home, which had a ghostly air about it now that its master was dead. The butler, a sombre man named Tilling, admitted us with reluctance. "We've already spoken with the police, sir," he said stiffly. Poirot gave a small bow. "I do not doubt it, monsieur, but it is not the police who can solve this matter. It is Hercule Poirot." Tilling hesitated, then nodded and stepped aside. Sir Reginald's study was just as we had left it, except for one small detail. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, stepping forward. "Do you see it, Hastings?" I followed his gaze. The desk, which had been neatly arranged the last time we visited, was now in slight disarray. But what drew Poirot's attention was a faint outline in the dust, where something had once rested but was now missing. Japp peered over Poirot's shoulder. "What are we looking at?" Poirot gestured. "There was a box here, mon ami, a small one. It has been removed." "A box?" Hastings repeated. "What kind of box?" Poirot turned to Tilling. "Tell me, monsieur, did Sir Reginald keep a safe?" The butler hesitated. "Yes, sir, but the police already examined it. It was open when they arrived and quite empty." Poirot's expression did not change, but I saw the keen light in his eyes. "And this missing box, do you recall what it contained?" Tilling swallowed. I am not certain, sir, but I believe it was where he kept his personal letters." There was a silence. Poirot exchanged a glance with Japp. "Letters," Japp muttered. "Of course. Blackmail letters." Poirot tapped his temple. "And now they are gone. Tell me, monsieur, who had access to this room before the police arrived?" Tilling shifted uneasily. "Only Miss Valerie, sir. Hastings and—"
I stiffened. "Valerie?" I repeated. "Who is she?" "Miss Valerie Ashworth, Sir Reginald's niece," Tilling said. "She came here after he was found."
"She asked for a moment alone before the police arrived." Poirot's voice was soft. "And no doubt she took the opportunity to remove something incriminating, perhaps?" Japp frowned. "A young woman? But what possible motive?" Poirot turned to him. "Come, Japp, have we not already seen that this case is one of manipulation and cunning? If a woman was at the heart of this affair—" He paused, eyes narrowing. Then, almost to himself, he murmured, "Mais oui, c'est elle." "Who? Poirot?" Hastings demanded. Poirot smiled, a smile that told me he had found the missing piece. "My friends," he said softly, "I believe it is time we paid Miss Valerie Ashworth a visit." Chapter 12. The Unexpected Villain. The drawing-room of Ashworth Manor was oppressively silent, save for the faint crackling of the fireplace. The assembled suspects, shifted uneasily in their seats as Hercule Poirot stood at the centre of the room, a commanding presence in his immaculately pressed suit. His sharp eyes, gleaming with intelligence, moved from face to face, as if measuring their very souls. Inspector Japp leaned against the mantelpiece, arms crossed, his expression sceptical but attentive. Hastings, standing at Poirot's side, wore an expectant look, eager for the masterful denouement that was sure to follow. At last, Poirot spoke. "Mesdames et messieurs, we have reached the final act of this drama. The players are all assembled, the threads of deception untangled, and now we must ask, who is the true author of this terrible tragedy?" His gaze rested on Miss Valerie Ashworth, sitting stiffly in a high-backed chair. Her hands, clasped in her lap, were pale and trembling. Next to her, Lytton shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting about the room as if seeking an escape. The others, Ashworth's solicitor, the butler Tilling, and Miss Vera Edgecombe, the late Sir Reginald's secretary, watched Poirot with varying degrees of apprehension. Poirot cleared his throat and continued. "We have been led to believe that Sir Reginald Ashworth took his own life in a fit of remorse over his role in Charles Rivington's death. A convenient solution, n'est-ce pas? But, as I have said before, the package is wrapped too neatly. When something appears too perfect, one must always suspect a guiding hand behind the scene.
Japp snorted. Now hold on, Poirot. The man left a confession. What more do you need? Poirot lifted a finger. Ah, but you see, mon cher Japp, the confession is precisely what makes me suspicious. A guilty man may end his own life, yes, but
A guilty man does not feel the need to convince others of his guilt. He knows what he has done. And yet, Sir Reginald's suicide note reads more like a script, words written not in despair, but with purpose. Hastings frowned. But what purpose? Poirot's voice dropped, his tone deliberate. To direct suspicion away from the true killer. A murmur rippled through the room. Vera Edgcomb's fingers tightened around the handkerchief in her lap, her face unreadable. Valerie Ashworth's breath hitched audibly. Japp exhaled sharply. So you're saying he didn't kill Everly? Then who the devil did? Poirot's moustache twitched. That, my friend, is the question we must answer. But let us first consider the nature of our victims. Charles Rivington, a disgraced financier, living under the false identity of Charles Everly. A man who fled London in shame, yet somehow found himself entangled with Sir Reginald Ashworth.
And then Sir Reginald himself, a man with secrets, a man who, we have learned, was being blackmailed. But by whom? His gaze turned suddenly, piercingly, toward Vera Edgcombe. Miss Edgcombe, perhaps you can enlighten us? A gasp escaped her lips, and her knuckles whitened against the fabric of her dress. Me? She stammered. That's preposterous. Why should I have anything to do with it? Poirot tilted his head. You were Sir Reginald's secretary for many years, were you not?
A trusted confidant?
Yes, but you handled his correspondence, his private affairs. You knew of his finances, his past dealings. You had access to his study before the police arrived. You, mademoiselle, had the means to remove any incriminating evidence before it was discovered. Her lips parted, but no words came. Japp frowned. Now, wait a minute, Poirot. That's all well and good, but where's the motive? Why should she want Everly dead? Poirot smiled, ever so slightly. Ah, but that, you see, is
the heart of it all, because Miss Edgcombe did not always call herself Vera Edgcombe. A silence fell over the room. Poirot continued, his voice softer now, but no less firm. Once, many years ago, she was Vera Stanhope. A name you might remember from the newspapers, Hastings. She was engaged to Charles Rivington before his disgrace. When his fraudulent dealings were exposed, she was left ruined, cast aside by society. She had trusted him, loved him, and he had destroyed her future. Vera Edgcomb's face was deathly pale. Poirot pressed on. And so, when fate delivered Rivington back into her world, she saw her chance at revenge. She learned of his blackmail against Sir Reginald, and she saw how she could kill two birds with one stone. She manipulated Lytton using psychological suggestion, planting the idea that he had committed a murder that had not yet happened. A brilliant deception, one that kept the police occupied while she lured Rivington back to London and poisoned him. Then when Sir Reginald became a liability, when she feared he might confess what he knew, she staged his suicide, ensuring that no one would question the matter further. A dreadful hush filled the room. Then at last, Vera Edgcombe gave a bitter, broken laugh. "You always were clever, Monsieur Poirot," she murmured. "Too clever." Japp stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "So it's true?" She straightened in her chair, all traces of feigned innocence gone. Her expression was calm, almost serene. "I gave that man my life," she said quietly, "and he ruined it. Do you know what it's like to be a woman alone, Inspector? To have your name whispered about, your prospects shattered? I spent years rebuilding myself, creating a new life. And then he came back, smug, untouched by the suffering he caused."
And I thought, why should he get to live when I had to suffer? Poirot sighed. Mademoiselle, vengeance is a poison in itself. You have drunk too deeply. She turned to Jap. I won't struggle, Inspector. Do what you must. Jap exchanged a glance
with Poirot, then gave a sharp nod. "Vera Edgecombe, I'm arresting you for the murders of Charles Rivington and Sir Reginald Ashworth." She did not resist as the constables led her away. The room remained still, as if the walls themselves were absorbing the weight of what had transpired. At last, Hastings exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Well, Poirot, I must say, that was a twist I didn't see coming." Poirot allowed himself a small smile. "The best deceptions, mon ami, are those that hide in plain sight." Hastings shook his head. "And to think, it all started with a missing cufflink." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Ah, but do not underestimate the power of the little things, Hastings. It is always the smallest clue that unravels the greatest mystery." Chapter 13. The Final Twist. The air in Ashworth Manor remained thick with tension long after Vera Edgecombe had been taken away. Poirot stood near the fireplace, his delicate hands adjusting his cuffs, while Hastings paced the length of the room, still trying to make sense of it all. Jap, for his part, appeared satisfied. He exhaled loudly, shaking his head. "Well, that's that then," he said, turning toward Poirot. The ladies confessed. A neat little bow on the whole.
Affair? Poirot let out a quiet chuckle. A bow, yes, but neat? No, mon ami, it is too neat, Jap groaned. For heaven's sake, Poirot, what now? The detective turned, his sharp eyes gleaming. Consider, Jap, if Mademoiselle Edgecombe is as meticulous as we believe her
to be, why would she make a mistake with Sir Reginald's supposed suicide? Hastings frowned. A mistake? What do you mean? Poirot clasped his hands together. Let us return to the crime scene, the study in which Sir Reginald was found. He was seated at his desk, the revolver in his right hand. Jap nodded.
And? Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. But Mademoiselle Edgecombe is left-handed. There was a stunned silence. Hastings stopped pacing. Jap straightened, his expression darkening. Are you certain? He asked.
Poirot gave a satisfied nod. Ah, mon cher Jap, I am always certain. You recall when I questioned her about Sir Reginald's schedule? She took notes, yes. And how did she write? Hastings's eyes widened. Good Lord, she used her left
hand. Jap's face hardened. So you're saying she didn't kill Ashworth? Poirot's gaze remained steady. I am saying that someone else had a hand in this affair. Mademoiselle Edgecombe may have killed Charles Rivington. This...
Much is certain. But she did not shoot Sir Reginald. The suicide was staged, yes, but not by her. Hastings stared. But then who? Poirot turned toward the desk and reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet pouch. Slowly, deliberately, he opened it and tipped its contents onto the polished wood surface. A single gold cufflink, engraved with the letter R, gleamed under the chandelier. Hastings gasped.
Jap took an involuntary step forward. But that was missing, Hastings exclaimed. Poirot, how did you... Poirot gave an elegant shrug. Ah, my dear friend, I retrieved it some time ago, and I have been waiting for just the right
Moment. Japp narrowed his eyes. Where did you find it? Poirot smiled. Where it was meant to be found, mon cher Japp. You see, the cufflink was never misplaced. It was planted at the Black Swan Inn. Japp scowled. Planted? But by who? Poirot steepled his fingers. That, my friends, is the final twist. Someone intended for us to believe that Sir Reginald Ashworth was tied to Charles Everley, that he had met him in secret, and that their connection was scandalous enough to be worth killing over. But tell me, who would gain from such a deception? Hastings's
mind raced. If Vera Edgecombe didn't plant the cufflink, then... He trailed off, his gaze flickering toward Valerie Ashworth. She sat frozen in her chair, her face ashen. Poirot turned toward her, his voice gentle but firm.
Mademoiselle, the time has come to stop pretending. Shall we discuss what truly happened on the night your father died? Her lips trembled. I don't understand. Oh, but you do, Poirot said softly. You see, mademoiselle. Edgecombe had motive for killing Charles Rivington, but she had no reason to kill your father. He was merely a man trying to escape the sins of his past. But you had everything to lose if his name was tarnished by scandal, n'est-ce pas? She shook her head vehemently. That's not true. I loved my father. Poirot nodded. Yes, I believe you did. And yet, when you learned of the blackmail, of the threats against him, what did you feel? Anger, fear. A tear slipped down her cheek. He was weak, she whispered. He was going to pay that man. He was going to give in to him. I told him we had to fight, to stand our ground. But he wouldn't listen. He was ashamed. I knew he would never recover from the humiliation. Poirot's voice was gentle. And so you made a choice. Her fingers twisted together in her lap. I only meant to scare him. I wanted him to see reason, to fight.
I thought if I made it look like Rivington had killed himself, then my father would be free from his torment. But when I confronted him in his study, he wouldn't listen. He told me he was going to tell the police everything. She shuddered.
We struggled. The gun, it wasn't supposed to go off. Silence fell over the room. Poirot exhaled softly. And afterward, you panicked. You staged the scene, wrote the note, and planted the cufflink, knowing it would lead the investigation away from you. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. I didn't mean to kill him. Japp stepped forward, jaw tight. Miss Ashworth.
I'm afraid you'll have to come with us. She slumped forward, her body racked with quiet sobs. Hastings let out a long breath. Good Lord, Poirot, I never suspected. Poirot nodded solemnly. The best lies, mon ami, are those woven
from truth. Japp gestured to the constables, who stepped forward to take Valerie away. As she was led from the room, she cast one last look at Poirot, eyes filled with sorrow. When the door closed behind her, Hastings turned to Poirot. So in the end, it wasn't just one crime, it was two, by two different people. Poirot gave a small nod. Yes, Hastings, one woman seeking revenge, another seeking protection, both driven by fear, both making terrible choices, and yet justice has prevailed. Japp shook his head in amazement. You never let a single detail slip. Past you, do you, Poirot? Poirot smiled. Ah, mon ami, it is the little grey cells that guide me. They never fail. Hastings chuckled. Well, old chap, I think you've earned yourself a rest after all that. Poirot lifted a finger. Ah, but Hastings, there is one final matter. Japp groaned. Oh, what now? Poirot grinned. Dinner, of course. A mystery may be solved, but a great detective still requires a fine meal. Hastings laughed as they made their way toward the door. "And a fine meal, Poirot, you shall have." Chapter 14. The Grand Denouement. The assembled company sat in stunned silence as Poirot took his final step toward the grand reveal. The firelight flickered against the polished wood panelling of Ashworth Manor's drawing-room, casting long shadows across the faces of those present. Japp, arms crossed, exhaled loudly. Hastings sat forward, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair, while Lytton, pale and shaken, stared into the middle distance, as though still unable to comprehend how he had been so thoroughly manipulated. Poirot, ever the showman, adjusted the sleeves of his immaculate suit and gave a satisfied nod. "Messieurs, mesdames, you now see the full picture. It was, as I suspected, a crime most deviously constructed. Mademoiselle Vera Edgecombe, who played the quiet, efficient secretary, was in fact the grand architect of this deadly deception." Hastings let out a low whistle. "Good Lord, Poirot, but tell me, how did she manage it? How did she make Lytton believe he had committed a murder that had not yet occurred?" Poirot's moustache twitched in amusement. "Ah, mon ami, there are many ways to influence the mind. Vera Edgecombe knew that Mr. Lytton suffered from periods of forgetfulness, from occasional blackouts brought on by stress. She observed his habits, listened to his anxieties, and exploited them. A skilled manipulator, she played upon his insecurities until he began to doubt his own memory. When she sat with him that evening at the Black Swan Inn, she guided him carefully, planting the idea that he had, in a moment of drunken recklessness, poisoned Everly's sherry.
Japp scoffed. But he didn't. There was no poison in that glass, was there? Poirot shook his head. "No, indeed. The poison came later, in London. But Vera did not need the poison to be in the glass that night. She only needed Lytton to believe that it was."
Lytton, his voice hoarse, muttered, "But why go to all that trouble? Why not just poison Everly in the first place?" Poirot smiled. "Because she needed an alibi, mon cher. A crime without a suspect is a puzzle with a missing piece. 2. Suspicious. She needed a scapegoat, and you, Mr. Lytton, provided the perfect one." Hastings frowned. "But what about the arsenic?"
"Everly was found exactly as Lytton described, the sherry, the traces of poison. How could Lytton have predicted that?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Because Vera Edgecombe ensured that it would be so. It was simple, you see. Everly was never
poisoned at the Black Swan. He left Marlowe unharmed, believing himself safe. But in London, Vera found a way to meet with him one final time. She gave him the arsenic-laced sherry, recreating the exact scene Lytton had described under her influence. A masterstroke of deception. The police, discovering Everly's body, would naturally assume Lytton's confession had been genuine. Japp rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "So she gets rid of Everly, frames Lytton for it. Neatly done. But why kill Sir Reginald Ashworth?" Poirot turned, his expression suddenly grave. "Because, mon ami, she knew Ashworth would never keep silent. He had been blackmailed by Everly, by Charles Rivington, as we now know him, and Vera feared he might reveal her connection to the case. After all, she had once been engaged to Rivington. If the police dug deep enough, they would uncover the link, and so she ensured his silence by staging his murder as a suicide." A heavy pause settled over the room. Lytton swallowed hard. "So, all along, I was nothing more than a pawn?" Poirot inclined his head. "It is unfortunate, but yes. She used you brilliantly. She made sure you were at the right place, at the right time, with just enough doubt in your mind to make you believe you had done something terrible." Hastings let out an incredulous laugh. "By Jove, Poirot, the sheer nerve of it all! You must admit it was almost perfect." Poirot gave a modest shrug. Ah, but almost is not enough when one faces Hercule Poirot. The truth will always find
its way to the light, mon ami. Japp exhaled and straightened. Well, I suppose I ought to be getting back to Scotland Yard to finalise things. We've got Vera's full confession, and with everything you've just laid out, it should be
a straightforward matter. He shook his head. A woman like that, cold as ice, she was. Poirot sighed. Not cold, mon cher Japp, simply driven by despair. A woman scorned, humiliated, and left to rebuild her life in the shadows of powerful men. She sought revenge, not just on Everly, but on the world that had allowed him to escape unpunished. Hastings gave an exaggerated shudder. Even so, Poirot, I must say, the way you put these things together, it's positively insufferable. You always seem to be 2 steps ahead of the rest of us. Poirot's lips curved into a satisfied smile. Ah, my dear Hastings, but of course, it is as it should be, Japp snorted. Well, I'll leave you to bask in your own brilliance, Poirot. Good evening to you. With that, he departed, leaving only Poirot, Hastings, and Lytton in the now quiet room. Lytton exhaled, rubbing his forehead. I suppose I should be grateful to you, Poirot. If it weren't for you, I might have spent the rest of my life believing I had committed murder. Poirot nodded kindly. Indeed, Monsieur Lytton. But take comfort. Your mind was not weak.
It was simply too trusting. Lytton gave a weak smile. I'll try to remember that. He rose, shook Poirot's hand, and made his way out. Hastings stretched.
Well, Poirot, another case solved, another villain unmasked. What now? Poirot beamed. Ah, Hastings, I think I shall reward myself with a particularly fine dinner. Perhaps a little crème brûlée to celebrate the triumph of the little grey cells. Hastings laughed. You never change, old chap. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Non, mon ami, and I never shall. Chapter 15. The Curtain Falls. As the constables led Vera Edgecombe away, the last vestiges of her composure gave way to something
raw and desperate. She had played her part with elegance, calm, precise, unflappable, but now, under the weight of Poirot's unerring logic, she was merely human. The eyes that had once glinted with quiet cunning were wide and unfocused. Her
breath shallow. How? She whispered, as she was ushered past Poirot, her voice hoarse with disbelief. How did you know? Poirot did not gloat. He merely inclined his head. Because, mademoiselle, the mind always leaves traces, just as the hands leave fingerprints.
No crime is perfect, only criminals believe it can be. Her lips parted slightly as if she wished to protest, but no words came. Perhaps she had always known deep down that it would end this way.
She had built her plan on deception and misdirection, but in the end it had collapsed under the weight of truth. Inspector Japp watched her go with a short sigh. Well, that's that then. I'll see to it that she's properly charged. Though, I must say, Poirot, I wouldn't have put her down as the murderer. He shook his head. Women like her, quiet, competent, people overlook them. Poirot gave a small smile. Precisely, mon ami. That is why she's succeeded for so long. It is easy to suspect the brash, the obvious, the ones who shout. But the ones
who listen, who watch. Ah, they are the dangerous ones, Japp grunted. Well, dangerous or not, she's behind bars now, that's what matters. Lytton, who had been standing near the fireplace, exhaled heavily.
He had hardly spoken since the confrontation, and when he did, his voice was uneven. I still don't understand how I let it happen. I was convinced I had done it. He swallowed, his hands gripping the back of a chair. She made me doubt my own mind. Poirot approached him, his expression softer than usual. She played upon your vulnerabilities, monsieur. She observed you, learned your weaknesses, and used them. It is not that your mind was weak, but that it was too open. A good quality in a friend, but a dangerous one when enemies are near. Lytton gave a tight, humourless laugh. Yes, well, I'll have to be more careful about that in the future. He hesitated, then looked directly at Poirot. I can never repay you, you know. Poirot shook his head. No repayment is necessary, monsieur. It is enough to see justice restored. Lytton nodded, his gaze distant. Justice? Yes, I suppose that's what this is. He straightened. I should go. There's much to put behind me. Poirot inclined his head. Au revoir, Monsieur Lytton. Take care. Lytton left without another word, his footsteps echoing down the long corridor. Hastings, who had been unusually quiet throughout the exchange, watched him go with a frown. Poor chap, he murmured. He may be free, but I doubt he'll ever be the same. Poirot sighed, moving toward the sitting area and settling into a plush armchair. Non, Hastings. No one ever is after such an ordeal. But he will rebuild. The human spirit is resilient, n'est-ce pas? Hastings regarded Poirot with a small smile. You know, Poirot, I do wonder sometimes. You unravel these intricate mysteries. You see into the minds of criminals, but do you ever tire of it? The deception, the cruelty? Poirot looked at him thoughtfully, then took a slow sip of his tisane before responding. Ah, mon ami, it is true, there is much darkness in the world, and I see more of it than most, but I also see justice, I see truth, and as long as that
remains, I do not tire. He set down his cup with a satisfied nod. Besides, Hastings, it is order and method that bring me joy, not mere chance, as you Englishmen are so fond of believing. Hastings laughed, shaking his head. You're impossible.
Poirot. Poirot's moustache twitched with amusement. And yet, mon cher Hastings, you would not have me any other way. Hastings sighed, watching as Poirot reached for another sip of his tisane, smug as ever. He had to admit his friend had a way of making even the darkest cases feel like puzzles, solved neatly into place. And though Hastings would never say it outright, he was quite sure that if there was one man in all of England who truly understood the workings of the human mind, it was Hercule Poirot.